today is a really special day, as most of you guys are aware of, and hopefully you know now. Today is Yom Hashoah, a very important day in the Jewish calendar, and a calendar for a lot of people as well. Before we get started, though, guys, you'll notice a couple of things that we'll do moving in and around. But let me start at the top. My name is Ethan. If I don't know you guys, please sure to introduce yourself. I work on the Google Plus marketing team. I focus on strategic partnerships. And I also help do a lot of really cool stuff with Reshet Ramah and the Jeweler Network here in New York. So this small hybrid group here is half Reshet Ramah, which is from the different Ramahs across the country, as well as a bunch of the Jewelers, which are Jewish Googlers here at the office. So those who are all attending, welcome. In addition to that, guys, I want to really say that this is a really interesting event because you guys can't see them just yet. I think Paul can see them, which is why he's looking over there in that corner. But we're also joined by 3 people remotely in different parts of the US today. I don't know if they can hear us yet. Can you give us a thumbs up, guys, if you can hear us? Awesome. So we're going to pull them up in a little bit, guys, once you get rolling along. But as we move forward with Paul's amazing testimony, I'll introduce him in a moment, we'll have Q&A both from people in the room as well as Q&A from people all over the US. So it'll really be a really cool program across the board. But before we start, I want to give a little devar. Obviously, this is Ramah. This is important to make sure we share a little word of Torah. And I was reading up on what we could discuss today, and I came across a really interesting phrase and a really interesting word. And the word is zocher, to remember. And cool fun fact, Google, we love numbers and we love data. The word remember is used in the Torah 228 times. I looked it up. I didn't count that myself. But what's interesting is that it's used in really happy times. We are told to zocher habrit, remember the covenant. We're told to zecher letziat Mitzrayim, remember the exodus of Egypt. We're told to remember lots of different things that are really happy. But what's interesting about Judaism is that you also have the piece to remember also the sadder things. If you're pretty good with your Torah, you know that Miriam has leprosy, and we're told to remember that because of what she did and what her actions were. We're also told to remember the tribe of Amalek, how they attacked Israel. And what's important is that the word remember and the word forget is a really, really valuable piece. There's a really cool transcription on Yad Vashem that talks about how being able to remember and being able to point to remember what's happening is the key to survival, and that generations may go on, but the theme and the essence will continue to move forward. And again, I think the Holocaust in itself is a really interesting historical account of what happened when things go wrong. But it's not only a Jewish account; it can be shared across all different languages, all different people of the world. And again, like lo yisagor al gur charev lo milchama. Brothers should not lift up sword against nation, neither they shall learn war anymore. So quickly, that was my little spiel. Again, I went really fast because you are not here to hear me. You're here to hear this wonderful gentleman, Paul Galan, who's here to share his very amazing testimony. Paul and I were speaking on the phone earlier this week, as well as a little bit while you guys were arriving to hear some of the basic small previews of what he's going to discuss. But we're very fortunate, we're very lucky to have him. Again, as we discussed, the number of Holocaust survivors are really dwindling, and it's really important to really remember and to take in all their amazing pieces of history that they can share with us, so that we, as a better community, can do good in the world. And with that, just so giving you guys an agenda, we'll have Paul share his amazing testimony. He'll go through his different accounts with his family. He'll show some photos. And around 35, 40 minutes, we'll open up to Q&A. So if you guys have questions, we have a microphone set up over there on your left. Please use the microphone so we can hear the questions in the recording, as well as the people who are at home. And with that, Paul, I'll have to transfer this over to you and give you the lead.
Thank you, Ethan. There's a new experience for me doing it this way, which is quite interesting to me as a filmmaker, especially. This is quite different, seeing all these faces and so forth. But I'm used to speaking to an audience of mostly students whom I can see. I can't see most of you very well, but I'm used to the lights anyway. I come from Czechoslovakia originally, the Slovak part of Czechoslovakia. And I was born in 1935. So when the war started, I was 5, 6 years old, basically. Came from a wonderful family. I'd like to introduce them to you, if I may. This was my pre-war family. Our name, by the way, our family name used to be Grunfeld. We changed it after the war to Galan. But here's my family. In the first row in the front, that little guy, that's me. Next to me is my aunt, Gisela. Next to her is my late grandfather, my father's father. And next to him was my aunt, Andush or Anna. Standing in the back, going from the left, is my sister Eva, then my father, my mother, my uncle Marius, who was married to the beautiful lady sitting to the right of my grandfather, their daughter, Litzy or Elizabeth, and finally my sister Susan. My sisters are twins, not identical. And the reason I feel it's important to bring my family into it is because my whole story, we were all connected and disconnected and torn apart and so forth and so on during the course of the Holocaust. So we lived in a small town of about 25,000 people, out of which 5,000 were Jewish. The war affected us very early on with the annexation of Bohemia from Slovakia, and Slovakia became a pro-Nazi puppet government, puppet country, adapting all the Nuremberg laws. And one of the first significant events that I want to talk about is when I was 6 years old, is having to put on a yellow star. Being branded as Jews, being differentiated from the rest of the population, which as a 6-year-old subjected me to not just humiliation, but being ganged up on by kids in the streets, being spat upon, being called dirty Jew and other terrible things, and being scared, being frightened. And just the whole idea of being branded like that is a terrible concept. It's a dreadful concept. It immediately changes your whole psyche because it instills fear. That was in the early days. There were many edicts that were passed by the Nazi government pertaining to Jews, and none of them were pretty. And they were intended to humiliate, to dehumanize, and to frighten people. Made us frightened of the unknown, because we knew that other things were going to happen, but we didn't know where or when or what. In 1942, I'll skip ahead because I have a long story and I don't want to dwell on all of it. 1942, they began transports, rounding up Jews and shipping them out. The euphemism that the government used was that we were being sent for resettlement. Instead of for killing, they used resettlement, or labor instead of being killed. We knew nothing about what was going on in Poland, but we sensed that it wasn't good. And the transports began in early 1942, where we watched our friends being rounded up, usually during the night, taken to the local high school athletic field, kept there for 2 days out in the open, and then marched to the train station. And those of us who were not arrested at that particular time, we walked along to the train station, which was on the far end of town, and we watched our friends being led by armed goons and loaded into trains. and there was an awful lot of crying and tears being shed. And the fear increased even more. And this was an ongoing process. It was happening every 2 weeks, every week. It would start with a rumor that there's going to be another transport. And sure enough, a few days later it happened.
Paul, who was leading these deportations? Was it led by the Nazis themselves?
The Slovak Nazis.
The
Slovak Nazis.
That's an important distinction to make.
There were no Germans. There were no German troops in Slovakia. These were all Slovaks doing the dirty work. And they were horrible. They were full of hate, full of venom. They were violent. There were beatings. We were finally taken into a transport one night, although we didn't expect it because my father was in a unique position. He was a very well-known grain merchant. His business was confiscated by the government, as were all Jewish businesses, but he had a Gentile partner who took over the business. And my father, because he was so well-known in this particular trade, was given an exemption from being deported because the government needed that expertise to feed the country. Grain provided food. So we were given a safe passage kind of document. My father was. And in spite of all that, one night in the middle of the night, the Nazis came to our home, banging on the door, waking us up out of a deep sleep, screaming and yelling and threatening and say, "Get dressed. Everybody pack one bag and you're coming with us." And in the middle of the night, they marched us to the schoolyard where there were already several hundred people assembled. And the sight that I experienced there was horrendous because these black uniformed goons, and that's the only thing I can call them, although they had a formal name, they were called the Hlinka Guard. They were pulling people out of the crowd and beating the hell out of them. They were especially picking on Orthodox men. They would make them stand up and stand in one place and sing and dance. And while they were singing and dancing, they were forced to sing and dance. They were beating them. They would cut their beards with bayonets. They would pluck the hair out of their faces. It was just wanton brutality. And to me, I was 7 years old by then. It was so scary. It was so frightening. Couldn't understand why this brutality, why such horrendous treatment of human beings. They beat my father up. He came out of the school building bloodied. The blood was just streaming down his face. His clothes were covered with blood. It was a horrific experience. Miraculously, after 2 days of being kept there, they released us. We couldn't understand why, but we found out. My uncle, the gentleman, I can't point to him, standing behind my grandfather to the right.
Third to the right.
I'm sorry?
The third one to the right?
The third one to the right, yes. He found out, he knew that my father had this government exemption, and he went to inquire why they took us away and found out that his Christian business associate told the authorities he no longer needed the Jew, take him away. So they took us away. And my uncle did an incredible thing. He walked into that man's office, pulled a pistol on him, pulled a gun on him, and threatened his life. And told him, "I don't care what happens to me, but you are a miserable human being. You betrayed an old friend. You go back to the authorities and give them a story, give them an excuse why you need your Jew partner again." And my uncle walked with him to the local government building with a pistol in his pocket and said, "If you come out of that building without a document, I'll shoot you. I don't care what happens to me. I'll kill you." That's why we were released. It was a harrowing experience. After that, no one felt safe anymore. My father was looking for different ways of saving our lives. At one point, we were baptized, we converted, we became Lutherans. Long story, but I will abbreviate it. We became Lutherans. We started going to church and doing all the ritual, including putting up a Christmas tree, and by mistake, we put a Star of David on top of it, which was pointed out to us by our neighbors. Then the government declared that any Jew who converted to Christianity after 1938 was still considered a Jew and was subject to the Nuremberg laws. So we were Jews again. We returned to synagogue, which was practically empty at that point. Not too long after that, they came to arrest us. They were taking us to a labor camp, an internment camp in Slovakia. As it happened, my sister Susan on the extreme right was at a friend's house when they came to arrest us. And my father managed to send word to her not to come home. Even though the police insisted that we know where she is, my father didn't let on. So they locked us up in a local jail, kept us there for several days while they were searching for her. Didn't find her. Then they took us by train to this labor camp. It was called Novaki. It was in the western part of Slovakia. And we were incarcerated there for a year. There's not much I can say about being in this camp because it was not a horrible experience. We lived in barracks, 100 people to a barracks. We ate well. We were well taken care of. The guards were not terribly violent. They could be bribed very easily. They were so corrupt. And the only problem was we lived in fear of being loaded into a train any time and shipped off to Poland. And that was a constant fear. Constant fear. Unbeknownst to me at the time, and to most of us in the camp, there was also an organized resistance within the camp, with some small arms and things like that. So should there have been a transport organized, they were going to resist. We were in this camp for a year. They never attempted to ship us out. This is now 1944. The Allies landed in Normandy. The Russians were pushing the Germans back from Russia. And we were all very hopeful that the war might come to an end. During that period, the Allies started dropping paratroopers and armaments into Slovakia to start an uprising against the pro-Nazi government. And for a short period of time, the uprising took place and was successful. And the partisans liberated a small part of the country, which included the camp. So one morning we woke up and we watched the guards being rounded up and locked up in the barracks by the resistance people, by the partisans who came into the camp. And we were free to leave the camp. It was a source of great joy and celebration, except there were not too many places we could go to, because only a small part of the country was liberated. So we moved to a nearby city where we found an apartment, and we're waiting for the liberation to expand. Unfortunately, it went the other way around, because that's when Germany sent 50,000 troops into Slovakia to crush the uprising. And by the end of September, the whole uprising fell apart. There were battles going on the outskirts of the city we were in. There were German fighter planes flying over at low altitude, strafing the main square in town. We knew it was over, and it was time to run. The only place left for us to run was into the mountains, in the hope of finding refuge in a mountain village. Now, all this time, by the way, my sister Susan, who was not arrested with us, we lost track of her. We didn't know where she was. So we headed for the mountains, along with hundreds of other people.
And Paul, to ask a question really
Yes.
fast, to jump in, because we now were talking about your story before. Was this before or after that night where the Nazis came knocking on the house on your door's house?
Well, this was after.
It was after?
Because we were released after that when my uncle intervened. They took us into the school. They arrested us. That's where we witnessed all the beatings and everything else. That was in 42. So this was, and then we converted, and then we were taken to the camp.
Got it.
Yeah, so that's the chronology. So this was already 1944. And we went running for the mountains. On a terribly cold, rainy day, we reached the forest, which were a good distance from the city where we were previously. And we are now going into the forest along with hundreds of other people. The Germans are in pursuit. At night, we see searchlights panning the forest, scanning the forest. We hear gunshots from down below. We hear shouting in German, halt, halt, boom, boom, boom. So we are trying to move as fast as we can, except a terrible rainstorm develops. And we are trudging through the mud blindly in the dark in the forest, tripping, falling, soaked to the gills, people scattering in different directions. And all of a sudden we realize that my sister Eva is not with us. She's the one on the extreme left. We lost her in this chaos. We're calling her, we're searching for her, no sign of her. She couldn't hear us either, we couldn't hear her if she was calling us because of the storm. The thunder, the lightning. Occasionally there was a bolt of lightning which illuminated the whole forest, so we were able to look around. And by this time we couldn't see anybody. So it was just 3 of us left. And we continued trekking higher and higher into the forest for hours until we were totally exhausted. We just couldn't go on any longer. And we huddled down under the trees. With the rain coming down. We put our arms around each other, sat down in the mud, and waited for the storm to end, waited for daylight. When daylight came, the storm ended. It was a beautiful, beautiful sunny morning. I'll never forget it. We heard the birds in the forest. And total silence otherwise, not a human being anywhere in sight. My father said, well, I don't know where we are. Let me go and look around to get a sense of direction. And he left us. And I was scared that he will not be able to find us. Oops, sorry. That's my mic. He came back a while later. He said, I found a stream that's running down this mountain. If we follow the stream, it might lead us to a village. Sorry. Hours later, we came upon a small hamlet. And I can show it to you. High up in the mountains. You see a few houses there, and that was it. This is a fairly recent picture. There were probably fewer houses then. So we came into this little village and went from door to door pleading for shelter. Most people chased us away. Go away. You may be Jews. We don't want Jews here. We don't like Jews. What we were equipped with was false documents stating that we were Lutherans. Our names were changed from Grinfeld. I forget what name my father picked it. And he had some money to offer the villagers. And of course, we were denying any possibility of being Jews. Finally, one of the villagers let us into his house. We settled down with them. This was in October. By the beginning of November, snow began to fall and all the roads became impassable. It was quite beautiful to look at and reassuring, because the villagers said the Germans could never possibly come through these snow-covered roads. Until one morning when we woke up and looked out the window and the village was crawling with German troops. And before long, a couple of soldiers came into the house saying, "Papieren bitte, Sie keine Juden da? And any Jews here? Any partisans?" They checked everybody's papers, and we kept a low profile. The owner of the house, the farmer, said, "No, Jews, we don't even know what Jews look like. There've never been any Jews here. And partisans, we haven't seen any." So they left. That night, we're getting ready to go to bed. There was nothing to do at night. There was no electricity. We had kerosene lamps. No television, for sure. We're getting ready to go to bed. Everybody slept in one room. There were beds and cots spread all over this room. Loud bang on the front door. 3 German soldiers, one is an officer, and 2 foot soldiers, come walking into the house as if they lived there. The arrogance was incredible. "We need a place to sleep." And the officer looks around and sees all the people who were there in the house. He realizes that there are no spare beds, but he picks a bed. He says, "I'm sleeping in that bed," and tells the 2 soldiers to spread their blankets on the floor. And he proceeds to this bed, starts taking off all his gear, drops it on the floor. I remember this like yesterday. Takes off his tunic, pulls off his boots, gets into bed. It happens to be the bed that my father and I shared. My mother had a much narrower cot next to us. So he takes that bed. So the 3 of us are trying to squeeze into my mother's narrow cot. And the German looks at this. He says, "You don't have to do that." He's being very nice at this point. He says, "You don't have to do this. You know, let the kleine Bursch sollt mit mir schlafen. Let the little boy sleep with me." Meaning me. So my parents protested, saying, "It's not necessary. We can manage." He says, No, let the little boy sleep with my bed. You can sleep better that way." He was trying to be nice. Our fear was that accidentally during the night he might see that I'm circumcised, which was a dead giveaway of being a Jew, because the population did not believe in circumcision. Only Jews were circumcised. And my mother dressed me in 2 pairs of long johns, as if that would protect me. And I got into bed next to the German officer. I turned my back to him. I reached out to my mother, held her hand all night long, and none of us slept a wink. We were praying that the night would end and that the Germans would leave without any harm being done to us, which, thank God, worked out just that way. And the Germans left in the morning. They even said thank you, and they walked out. They were in this village for a week. One night, again in the middle of the night, they always like to visit during the night. Loud pounding on the front door. The farmer opens the door. There's a different German officer there. With his flashlight, walks into the room where everyone is in bed. Goes shining the light into each person's face. Finally comes to my mother. He looks at her. sits down on the edge of her bed and says to her in German, he says, I know that you can speak German because you're a Jew. You are here with your husband and your son. The villagers have turned you in. But do not fear. We are leaving here early in the morning. And I tore up the report of you being Jews. So you're safe for now. And with that, he got up. Oh, he says, but leave this village as soon as you can because there'll be other troops coming here. And next time you won't be so lucky because the villagers will turn you in again. And with that, he got up and left. 2 days later, we hired a farmer with a horse and sled who took us to another village. I'm sorry, I spoke too much today. Took us to a different village where he knew some people. And finally, we found shelter in another household. That household consisted of women and children. All the men were away in the coal mines, working during the winter in the coal mines, a different part of the country. So we settled in with this family. Germans came into the village several times. And the woman of the house, she was a decent person. She always hid us in the barn, in the cellar, in the potato cellar. Sometimes we'd stay in there 2 days. We would hear the German soldiers directly above us on the wooden floor, searching for Juden und Partisanen. They never discovered the trap door leading to the cellar. This happened a number of times. Skipping ahead, Christmas time, all the men came home from the coal mines for the holidays. First thing was, who are you people? When they saw us. What are you doing here? Are you Jews? If you're Jews, we don't want you here. Get out. They started giving us a very hard time. Of course, we were denying it, showing them our documents. Didn't help. They were really harassing us. Finally, the woman of the house intervened. Says, leave them alone. They're nice people. They're decent people. Let them be. A few days after Christmas, the 30th of December, I know the date because it was my father's birthday, we find ourselves surrounded early in the morning by Germans. The village is crawling with them. And before long, 2 soldiers come walking into the house. They order all the men, all the adult men, to get their coats, take their documents with them, go out to the street to be identified by an officer. So all the men, including my father, went out to the street. Then they proceed to check everyone's identity papers in the household. And they look at my mother, they look at me, and they say, you're coming with us. At that moment, I said to myself, this is it, we're finished, we're dead. I started shaking. My mother calmed me down, got me dressed, took me by the hand, and we walk out of the house into the farmyard. The 2 soldiers walking behind us with their machine guns, pointing at us. As we're walking towards the gate separating the farmyard from the street, all of a sudden one of the soldiers rushes up ahead of us and goes like this. Go back. Schnell, schnell, zurückgehen. Schnell. Hurry up. Go back. My mother and I ran into the house, shut the door, and the soldiers left. A few minutes later, all the men returned, except my father. Where's my father? You know, you were lying to us. The German officer took one look at your father and said, Jew. They let him away. So you were lying. You are Jews. Get out of this house. Leave. We don't want you here. I began to cry and plead. We're not Jews, you're making a mistake. Isn't it bad enough that my father is gone? And now you're chasing us out of that. Where are we going to go? We're going to go out and die in the snow. We have no place to go. Finally, the woman of the house yelled at him. It was their son-in-law. He said, leave them. She said, leave them alone. It's a woman and a child. Their father is gone. Leave them alone. Let them be. So he relented. A few days later, the men, thank God, left for the coal mines again. And we were left alone. The Germans came to the village several more times. Each time we hid in the cellar, and they didn't find us. And then one day, a partisan woman came walking into the house. She was a big, tall, strapping, beautiful woman, wearing a black beret with a red star on it, sheepskin coat, high boots, and carrying a machine gun. She walked in very friendly, she says, greeting everybody, introduces herself by name. Her name was Kata Lorberova. She was from Slovakia. She was a Jewish girl. And she turns to my mother and whispers to her, is your name by any chance Serena? My mother says, yes. Is that your son? Is that Paul? My mother says, yes. She says, I bring you greetings from your daughter Eva. She's in the mountains with us. She's safe. She asked me to try and find you in the village, some village. She thought you must be around here somewhere. So we suddenly got word that my sister was alive with the partisans. And this partisan woman told us that they'll be looking out for us as much as they can and give us warnings if Germans were coming into the village so we can hide, which happened several times. And she came down, always told us, in 2 days there'll be Germans coming in. So we were prepared and we hid in the cellar. Then one day she came in, it was already the beginning of March, and she said, you two will now have to leave here. The other side of the mountains is already liberated by the Russians. The Germans are losing badly. They are desperate, but they're constantly searching for Jews in the mountain villages. And if they find anyone they even suspect of being Jewish, they kill them on the spot. So you're going to have to leave here. So in a few days, there'll be a group of other refugees coming through the village. Join them. Take nothing but food for a day. You'll cross over the mountains, and you'll be free the next morning. And just as she predicted, a few days later, about 10 people came trudging through the village. They looked like refugees, just like we looked like refugees. Yeah, we were just in bad shape, all of us. We joined them, and we started to climb up this enormous snow-covered mountain. It was a beautiful morning. We started at 6 o'clock in the morning. It was a gorgeous day. The sun was out. The snow was reflecting. And we were climbing higher and higher and higher all day long. And being hopeful, being happy that next day we'll be free. Except nature, Mother Nature had different plans for us. Because by early evening, a blizzard blew in. And we were caught in this horrendous blizzard. I've never seen anything like it. In the movies you see it. The snow was blowing, the wind was fierce, the cold was unbearable. And we are climbing this steep mountain, trying to get to the summit to cross over. In the dark. It's nighttime already. You can't see a thing. We're going blindly. The snow becomes very icy. And I'm holding on to my mother's hand all the time, never letting go. And all of a sudden I slipped on the icy snow. And my hand pulled out of my mother's hand, and I started sliding down the mountain. And I'm calling, "Mother, mother, mother." I'm yelling, and she could hear me. She could barely hear me, but she was responding, "Paul, where are you?" I said, I'm sliding down. I'm falling. I can't stop. I can't stop. Help me." And I finally land on some kind of a plateau. And she's calling to me, "Keep calling my name so I know where you are. I'll come down to you." And she laid down on the icy snow and slid down. And that slide felt like an eternity. She found me. And it was just the two of us in the midst of this blizzard. Cold, frightened, freezing. And she puts her arms around me and she's holding me for warmth. And she keeps saying to me, and I just wanted to fall asleep. I was so tired. I was so cold. I wanted to go to sleep. And she keeps saying to me, "Paul, don't fall asleep. Don't fall asleep, Paul, darling, because you'll die if you fall asleep. Don't fall asleep, you will die." She kept shaking me, shaking my body to keep me awake. I don't know where she got the strength to keep herself awake. It would have been so easy just to give up. But she had incredible strength. And she kept me awake all through the night. In the morning, the storm had ended, the sun came out. And it was just the two of us, all alone on this mountain. But we saw that we had gone over the summit. So we proceeded to start going down the mountain in the deep snow. But the sun was shining, so it was tolerable. No sign of any of the people who were with us. At one point, we see an arm sticking out of a snowdrift. And we go in that direction, hoping to find somebody who was hiding or something. It was one of the people from our group, frozen to death. The frost just covered his face. He's gone. My mother covered my eyes and pulled me away. And we continued on down. We came upon another body later on, also frozen. And we just kept going and going all day long. Finally, we saw the forest down below. We headed for the forest. As we approached it, we saw smoke coming out of a hut. From among the trees, I'm sorry. So we headed in that direction. And we came upon a group of huts with 3 saddled horses tied up outside. So now, what do we do? Who's in there? Is it friend or foe? Did we cross over? Are they Germans? Are they who could they be? But we didn't care anymore. We could not continue. We knocked on the door. And the door opened. It was a Russian partisan. Saying, "Who are you people? What do you want?" So I said to him in Slovak, I said, "We crossed over the mountain, escaping from the Germans. Can you please provide us with some food and shelter?" He asked us to come in. There were several Russian partisans in there. They gave us food. They gave us shelter. Spread blankets on the floor, and we slept for 15 hours. We stayed with them for a couple of days. We told them our story. They wanted to know where we are from. We told them. They said, "Your town was liberated in November. This was March." They gave us directions. They gave us some food to take along. And we're about to set off on our journey home. Except that they changed their minds. They saw a single woman there. And they took my mother into another room and took turns with her, while one of them kept me in check in this other room. Then finally we escaped. We got out of there when they were done. It took us a week to go home. should stop. We're running late.
We're doing well.
Yeah.
Do you want to skip to your journey to the States?
Sure. Well, I want to conclude by saying that out of this family, my grandfather perished. His daughter sitting next to him, my aunt, her husband, and their daughter perished. My sisters returned one by one. My sister Eva came home 2 weeks later. She crossed over the mountains. My father came home in June. He was captured. After they captured him, he was sent to Buchenwald, and he survived Buchenwald. Susan, we didn't know anything about until August. She returned with my aunt, the one who's sitting next to me. They found each other in Bergen-Belsen. Susan was taken to Auschwitz and then to Bergen-Belsen. And the two of them found each other and they survived. The rest of the family perished. That was the happy end of the story. The fact that one entire family, immediate family, survived. It was unheard of. 5 of us survived. And being separated, being in different places, we made it. We tried to rebuild our lives there. My father was a very industrious person. He tried to rebuild his business, rebuild our lives post-war, but the anti-Semitism was terrible. Even though democracy was reestablished, the hatred that prevailed was just awful. Out of 5,000 Jews in my hometown, 250 returned. So we started making plans to leave. It took several years because of the quota system. Meanwhile, my sisters, when Israel was established, my sisters went off to Israel. Because the Iron Curtain was about to drop, and they were able to go to Israel. Eva got married before they left. Her husband was trained by the Haganah in Czechoslovakia, and they went to Israel. He went straight into the army. And my father, my mother, and I, that's another long story I won't go into. We eventually came here in 1951 on a beautiful, sunny March 12th of 1951. We landed in this country. I got my education here. My parents worked very hard. They had no skills. He was a businessman. He had no other skills. They never spoke the language very well. But they were happy, never complained. Eventually, my sisters and their families came here. It took years. It wasn't until 1958 that finally my sister Susan and her family came. Eva and her family came earlier, in 55. We were reunited. We had wonderful lives here. My father blessed America every day. And thanked God for the fact that we survived as a family. I became a filmmaker by profession. I've had a very successful career here in New York, doing television documentaries and industrial films. Judy and I have 2 kids. They're grown-ups. Daughter Leslie and son Philip. Philip became a Baal Tshuva. He lives in Israel in a settlement. He's got 9 kids. And how many grandchildren? 21. Leslie, our daughter, lives in Tenafly, New Jersey. She's got 2 great daughters. They're secular like we are. And I thank God every day for being here.
Thank you very much for sharing this. I know obviously it's very hard to go through all that stuff, but in the detail and explaining all the different processes, it's absolutely amazing. Again, I'm sure we've heard lots of testimonies, different survivors, and again, the miraculous pieces of fortune and luck just that go through these different things and help along the way and at the right time at the right place. It's very, very fortunate. At this time, we'd love to open up to questions. We have a microphone over there on the right-hand side, the left-hand side for you guys. Either feel free to grab it and you can move over, you could pass it along. And we're also joined by some people over Hangout as well. So I don't know if you guys could flip Jordan to our Hangout participants. We're actually joined by my younger brother, Avi, who's in Austin, Texas right now.
Oh, that's where our granddaughter is in school at the university.
He's actually in San Antonio, sorry.
Oh.
I completely forgot where he even lives. And that's completely my fault. And then we also joined by Dylan Abraham, who's in Boston as well. So does anyone have a question they want to start out with? Sure.
Oh.
Thank you for sharing your story with us. It's an honor to be here with you today. You were very young when the war broke out, and
Yeah.
I guess, you saw things that no one should ever see in their life. But I guess at what point did you kind of process what had happened, what you had seen, and kind of, you so eloquently tell your story now, but I'm sure it took a long time for you to get there. So I'm just curious how that happened.
It took a very long time. I couldn't talk about these things. Within the family, we talked about it, but otherwise, somebody tell me, "Oh, you were a survivor. Tell me what happened." I refused to talk about it. I couldn't deal with it. Eventually, after many things that happened in my life, I decided to go into therapy. And after 5 years of fairly intense therapy, I began to realize, I learned what a profound effect my experiences had on me and my personality, on my relationships with family and other people, my whole outlook on things. I was sick and I became healthy because I was able to put everything in perspective. I learned so much about myself and how these experiences affected me, what they did to me. My poor wife suffered for a long time, but she had the strength to survive all these horrible years that I was going through. She's still married to me. She loves me still. And I love her dearly. So yes, I had to process all that. There were several catalysts that occurred during those years that made me start looking at myself. And some of it had to do with my work. I was editing a film for CBS on Anne Frank. And as I was working on that film, suddenly my self-awareness was elevated. It made me think about my own experiences. Then I did a film on the Warsaw Uprising. That reinforced my sense of identity. Not that I ever denied being a Jew, but made me realize that I really need to deal with my experiences, put them in some kind of perspective. And there were other factors that I won't go into now. But I became healthy. And as the years went on, I was a communicator. I communicated through film. And then one day I said to myself, someday I have to put my skills into doing what I'm doing right now. I have to communicate. I have to tell whoever will listen what I've gone through. Because I had a happy ending to it too, which was wonderful. So here I am. Today is the third time that I'm speaking about telling my story, which is exhausting. And I don't like to do it this way. I don't like doing it back to back because it's emotionally exhausting. And I speak to students and they ask me, why do you do it? And I say, because it's my responsibility. Because we have to spread the word. I tell the kids, if anybody ever tells you that there was no such thing as a Holocaust, you can tell them it's a lie. Because you've met somebody who lived through it, and I heard that person's story, and I believe him. There's so much hatred against us Jews throughout the world today. Our self-awareness is the most important way that we can fight it. And we must fight it. As someone said recently, never again is only as good as how we back it up and what we do about it. And I really believe that. Never again is only as good as what we make of it, how we put it into effect.
Very true. Let's see if we can get one of the questions from one of our participants over at Hangout. Dylan or Avi, do you guys have any questions over there?
Yeah, sure. I just wanted to thank you again for spending the time to talk to us today. And I was just wondering if after you guys came to the United States in 1951, if you've been back to Europe at all, if you at any point have, visited your old villages that you had lived in, and what that experience might have been like.
We went back for the first time in 1990, right after the collapse of the communist regime in Czechoslovakia. I was on a shoot in Europe, and all I kept hearing was in the news the celebrations in Czechoslovakia about the fact that they were going to have their first free elections. And I really wanted to go back for years, not because there was anyone there I wanted to see, but because I had to put some of these memories in perspective. As I used to refer to it, I wanted to deal with the ghosts. So we went back to my hometown, and it was a big disappointment. The only signs of Judaism there were the huge synagogue that used to stand in the middle of town was torn down by the communists. And the only other sign of Jewishness was the Jewish cemetery on the outskirts of town. Oh, and a plaque that the authorities, the town fathers, put up on the building next to where the synagogue used to stand. And this huge plaque spoke about the German bestiality who killed 4,000 so many of our citizens. And what upset me about that plaque was, our Jewish citizens, what upset me about the plaque, that there was absolutely no mention of the Slovak bestiality that took place. And I said, what a lie. Then went back one more time with my sister Susan and her family, because I needed an older person, someone older than I, to affirm, to validate what I remembered. And as it turned out, I remembered things better than she did at that point. And Judy, of course, was with me all the time. And the first time we went, our daughter came with us. And then after that, I had no desire to go back there. Nothing there.
Any questions? I have a question.
Certainly.
What kept you going? I think obviously there's several parts of your testimony. You obviously were close to freezing to death. You were climbing over mountains. You were sliding down mountains. What was the internal spirit or the strength that kept you moving? Was it your family? Was it the thought of seeing people?
Family.
Faith?
Family. Hoping that I will see my father again. Hoping that I will see my sisters again. Had a wonderful family. We had a wonderful family. We all cared about each other so much. And just instinct, human instinct drives you, you know? You want to survive. You see evil all around you and somehow you just want to get beyond it. There was so much evil. And somehow, I came from a family that knew nothing but love and warmth and caring for one another. And I guess that's what gave me the strength. That's what gave my mother the strength. That's what gave my father and my sister the strength to survive the concentration camps. We cared about each other so much. We wanted to see each other again.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Sure.
Certainly.
Yeah, you guys can like line up, by the way, if you'd like. We can pass around the microphone as
I
well.
don't think I need the microphone, but I'll use it. How did your father get money and the papers? How did that happen?
Well, during that uprising, first of all, while we were in the internment camp, his father, my grandfather, was back home. And my father would occasionally be given a pass to go visit his father who was ill, as long as the rest of us stayed in the camp. So every time he went back home, he managed to bring some money back with him and hide it. The papers he was able to obtain during that period when we were released from the labor camp, when we were quote unquote liberated, he was able to obtain the forged documents. So that's how he was able to obtain those two things.
Yeah, absolutely. Sure. Even there's a microphone over there. Thanks, Jordan.
I was just curious about where your family's new last name came from.
My sister Susan applied to the university in 46, excuse me. And she was advised to change her name from Grunfeld to anything that sounded more Slovak. And she picked a common name. Just at random, she picked a name. My parents were away on vacation, and she called them. She said, "I'm changing our name." And my father said, "Go do it." So that she would be admitted to the university. That's how the name came about. People ask me if I'm French. I said, "No, I'm not French." It was a common Slovak name, Galan. That's how it came about.
Dylan, do you have any questions on your end from Boston?
Here, do I have sound bag? Sorry.
No, you're good.
Yeah, thank you so much again, as has been said before. I think my question's more from a collegiate standpoint. I've been really involved in the Jewish community here at Northeastern University for years. What is it that we could do? Obviously, it's Yom Hashoah. What is it that we could do to remember, to stay strong as a Jewish community, to remember everything that our people have been through throughout the Shoah today?
And first and foremost, never forget that we are Jews, and never be ashamed of being Jews, and be proud of it, because we are a very important people in history, and we are no less than any other ethnicity or religion, and we must speak out. We must speak out. We should never be shrinking violets because somebody is talking against Jews. Stand up for ourselves. We have a lot to be proud of. In this country, in the state of Israel, in any country that we live in. I mean, I take heart from, whether it was sincere or not, but I take heart from what the president of France said recently, that without Jews, France would never be the same country. It's true, because we have so much to give, so much to contribute. Whether it's intellectual, whether it's business sense, whether it's science, whatever. We have so much to give, and we've been giving and sharing. Look at the technology that comes out of Israel today. You guys should know it better than anybody.
Try.
There's nothing to be ashamed of. And we must speak up. Never be embarrassed to speak up. If somebody says something about Jews, you challenge it. You challenge the lies that are being spread.
I think in wrapping this up, there's a really interesting quote from Yad Vashem, from the Baal Shem Tov, who talks about how forgetfulness really leads to exile. How when you forget, you kind of drive into that conversation. But really, the resilience is a secret weapon that you can look at, kind of towards like the redemption and the overlapping piece, and really talking, honoring, being part of it, being an activist, standing up and speaking your voice is the most important thing, and that's really the value that we're going to have here going forward, both to Jews and to people around the world, to really make this world a better place.
Absolutely.
I think on that note, we have a Yizkor candle that we will light together, and then we'll we'll stand for a moment of silence, and then we'll break. So is the candle over there? Put it right there. Thank you. Would you like to light the candle, Paul?
Surely. Be honored.
We can stand, guys, as well. I can light the match. You got it.
Go ahead.
Here. You have to light the candle. I'll stand for a moment of silence. Thank you very much, Paul, for everything.
My pleasure.
Have an entire. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.